Bingo. Right. Let's hope I have access to the cloud when it finishes then to be able to do that. I wasn't sure how big a file it was going to be for, say, an hour's conversation, so thought recording to the cloud was probably a safer option.
So I've tried to click record, and it's saying ask the host to give you permission. So you can obviously only one of us can record.
Yeah. Okay.
Although I tell you what, I will do. I'll open the Wondershare thing that I was using, and I can.
There's like a full screen and audio grab, doesn't it?
Yeah. Record media. Right, I think that's recording as well. So hopefully we've got two. Okay. There we go.
You ready to start?
I'm ready to start. I'm feeling good, Steve, but I'm ready to start.
And as we said yesterday, anything we're not sure about or want to rephrase, we can just pause and agree we want to scrub that and start again. And I'll ask the same question again. So no pressure really, apart from I guess our families want to see us at some point this evening, and so time pressure.
That's fine.
So in order to start, I have to say I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk to you about the history of Memusi, how it all started, and your journey within it. I've heard it many times, but from other people. So hearing it directly from the horse's mouth feels quite an honour and a privilege. So thank you for that. I think the story of how the charity started has become stuff of legend, but I've never actually heard it from yourself. So where did it all start for you, Matt?
I feel the pressure, Steve, that we're calling it legend. So let's hope that it comes across in the right way. Memusi started very much by accident. There was no design behind what I endeavoured to do. And in fact, growing up, the only thing that I wanted to do was play football. I had no real focus on any subjects in school. I did okay in school. I ended up with 7 C's in my GCSEs. So I did okay, but I didn't really sort of set the world alight, and I didn't really know what I was going to do in life. And when I sat my GCSEs, before I got my grades, my parents said to me, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." Other than playing professional football, there was no idea and no plan. And my parents said, "Why don't you do computers? Because computers is the thing to be when you grow up." And, that's where my career path started. And I went to university and then ended up getting a job in a bank doing computing. And, I still work in that bank doing something else now. But my life was going down the path of computers. And it was something that I could do. And I was good at it. And I've ended up with 2 degrees in computing, but I'd not really found that thing, that sort of purpose, the thing that I was meant to be doing. Sally and I met when we were 15. Sally sat behind me in French at school, and we'd gone to college and university, and then got married and got a house. And for the first time in our lives, when we were 24. We had saved some money and we were going to go on a nice holiday, and we decided we were going to go to Kenya and Tanzania. We were going to go on safari and we were going to lay on a beach for a week. And I'd never been to Africa. I knew very little of Africa, other than what you see on the TV, on documentaries or comic relief. I knew nothing of Africa and didn't really know what to expect. And one of my friends had been to Tanzania the year before on honeymoon, and he said, "When you go, buy pencils, because kids in Africa love pencils." So I went to the pound shop in Halifax, bought 100 pencils for £1, and off we went on holiday. And on those types of holidays, when you get so well looked after, you never get the chance to meet real people. You get taken from the plane to your hotel, and you have incredible experiences, 5-star treatment, but you never get to meet real people. Now, every day that we were there, our vehicle broke down. Every single day. Driver would get out of the car and kick the car and hit the car, and off you would go again. And on the last day when we were leaving Tanzania, going back to Kenya, our car broke down and it didn't get fixed. And we were stuck and we missed our flight. But we met a child who came walking down the road. And I said to Sally, quick, grab those pencils. And she handed a boy a handful of pencils and he stood in front of her and he bowed. I'd never seen anything like it. And I still have never seen anything like it. The gratitude for something so small was immense. And that's where Memusi started. I came home and did some research because I couldn't understand the gratitude. And I found out that 46 million children in Africa were not going to school, and for very basic reasons. And one of those reasons being you can't go to school if you've not got the stationery. So that had been a trigger for that boy to stay in education. And for me, that's where things started. I contacted charities every lunchtime, phoned them, emailed them, wrote to them, told them that I wanted to buy pencils, and nobody would let me help. People wanted money. People wouldn't let me help in the way that I wanted to help. And then I finally got introduced to a lady in South Kenya, a lady called Nancy Mantoy, who had started a school called Memusi in 4 iron sheet walls. She'd been educated herself, started a school, and she couldn't afford the equipment to run it. And therefore, her need was my offer. And we got into contact. I emailed her. I put a jiffy bag of pencils in the post and addressed them to Magadi. And 3 weeks later, I got a photograph of 6 kids holding the pencils that I'd sent. And that Memusi was born. And the journey has gone on now for 16 years since.
All down to a simple bow by a very polite child.
And all down to an accident, all down to, if we hadn't have been breaking down every day, we'd have missed that opportunity. And, there was lots of things that happened on that holiday, lots of things that bothered me. And maybe eventually I would have got there, but, that breaking down and meeting that child really triggered something in me.
Brilliant answer. Thank you for that. Apart from becoming a professional footballer, once you'd had that, your moment of enlightenment, what were your original objectives when you were talking to Semantoy? How far did you allow your ambition to reach?
I can't say that for a long time I really knew where I was doing, and maybe that's an odd answer from somebody running a charity, but I wouldn't change anything now. I wouldn't change anything. If somebody on that day had said, here's £1 million, and I'd have gone and spent it and built classrooms, I could have achieved something there, but I don't know that I'd have done it in the right way. And for me, I've learned every single day. I learn every single day in that 16 years I've learned. And for me, right at the outset, I wasn't running a charity. I was sending pencils to kids. That's all I was doing, because I knew that was a trigger point of making a difference in somebody's life, and for such a small amount of money. So I did that. Parents saw what I was doing, and friends saw what I was doing, and eventually work colleagues saw what I was doing. And I think that ability to see something in your hand today, and then in a couple of weeks' time, it's in the hands of a beneficiary, was incredibly powerful for people. And people wanted to help. I had work colleagues who were emptying their desks, and going, here, take this, send that. And, that's where I started. Now, a year or so down the line, I went on a course within the bank called Unlocking Potential. And every member of IT staff got sent on this course. And it was an incredible course. It didn't talk about work. It talked about people like Bob Geldof and James Dyson, and people who believed in themselves, even when people say, you can't do that, that's not going to work. People who believed in themselves, but very ordinary people at the same time. So not just the celebrities who made it, but really ordinary people who you could identify with. And that was the common theme. And it taught you methods about how you deal with these things. Now, this was a 3-day course over 3 days, over a long period of time. It wasn't back to back. And I remember 2 things. When I came home, I never stopped talking about it. And I remember Sally turning around to me and going, "You really enjoyed that, didn't you?" Because it was so resonant with me. But I walked out of that course in Bradford, and I got in the car and I phoned Simantoy, and I said, "What's the dream?" And she said, "My dream is I'll have a school for 400 kids." And I went, "I'll help you do that." And I put the phone down and drove home and thought, I've got no idea how to do that. I've never raised a penny in my life. And I mean, I'd never done bake sales. I'd never done a sponsored anything. But I've just promised a woman that I've never met before in a place that I've never been to before that I'm going to build them a school. That's how powerful that course was for me. And I just needed to figure it out. I needed to figure it out. And the first thing was I thought I need to build something. I need to build a classroom because, you know, the kids that are there will grow, and we need to grow the school. I need to fundraise. And I thought people cycle. I'll cycle Land's End to John O'Groats, and because that'll be easy. And I mean, clearly I figured that it wasn't. But that was the start of my fundraising journey. Not being a cyclist, I was setting myself challenges that I had no experience of. But
yeah,
yes, going back to where I started this answer, I've learned along the way, because what I've done is I've learned by listening to people, okay, and working with people and challenging people, but having people challenge me as well to really make sure that we were going to go forward. Now, based on the income that we had, we decided to grow by one classroom every year. We'd take the kids, the youngest kids, they'd go up a year, and we'd bring in new young kids again. Now, that is exactly how education should be done, because you can't bring in kids who are 13, 14 into the education system who've never been to school. You need to start them off at the right age. So again, by accident, the Memusi plan and how we evolved it, and the long-term intervention and support and partnership has been the right thing, you know, and like I said, not by design, very much by accident.
And that direct connection that you talk about, Matt, in terms of being able to send something in the post and then see it in the hands of somebody in the school, I think is what has inspired a lot of people that I talk to associated with the charity. And that's what differentiates us from all the other worthy charities out there, where you can pay money into it and it just goes into a huge black hole. Whereas Memusi, it's far more immediate and direct, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, that's by design as well. Very, very much so. You know, the first question that you asked me, and I talked about me wanting to help and having a really clear way of how I wanted to help, and no charity would let me help. Nobody would let me do it. Which, imagine that in the charity sector, going, I want to help. No, you know, we don't want that help, but give us money. And for me, that is such a short-sighted view, because people have so many different ways they can help. Money is vitally important. Don't get me wrong, vitally important. But at the same time, there are things that we can do, you know, which has then become, again, part of our strategy. You know, work with impact teachers, for example. You know, they have skills of teacher development. They understand education. They come in and do that. I'm not going to them, can you give me £10,000, please, so that I can go and do this work? Just come and do it, because we need this. So that reality of connecting and even giving as little as a pencil is for me vitally important, and the ability to see inside our work. You know, it's a must for me. Now, we will make mistakes. We always will do, because that's just how life is. But people's ability to see inside and go, I understand how we're making a difference is integral for me.
Brilliant. Yeah. So having promised something that you had no idea how you're going to achieve it.
Yeah.
Describe your first trip out there.
I went with my dad because Sally was pregnant. So I went with my dad, and I arrived. It was my second ever trip to Kenya, and we landed in Nairobi, and we were met by Anne Simantoy, her daughter Sheila, and I remember Sheila being pushed forward toward me to come and give me a hug. I felt really sorry for her. I think she was 11, and she was being pushed towards this stranger who she'd never met before, to go and give a hug, and forced into that. She had a driver with her, not as grand as that sounds. It was a friend who had a car, so she didn't drive. So he drove. The one thing that I remember is we got in the car and she prayed. And both my dad and I have had this conversation, and we wondered why she needed to pray before she set off. Before we set off, and then we realised why, because we ended up having an accident as he reversed down the motorway.
Oh no!
Doing a 3-point turn. It was a guy called Caviar, and I remember that we did a couple of things first before we went to Magadi. Now, my first trip to Kenya was very, like I say, 5-star, where people were used to Westerners. I went into Magadi at a time where white skin, where British people was a foreign thing. I remember being stared at a lot. I remember feeling uncomfortable. I remember being made to feel incredibly welcome there. And there's been 2 or 3 times in Kenya where I've felt overwhelmed at the responsibility of Memusi. And I think that first trip triggered that in me, this real look of hope that somebody was coming and they would be there to help. And bearing in mind, I'd done very little. We'd built some classrooms before I'd gone. It was a couple of years into my fundraising that I ended up going for the first time, where I think we'd got to a size where I needed to. But this real look of hope of the future, and to have that sitting on your shoulders, as a very small charity, as an individual, was incredibly hard. So yeah, lots of mixed feelings that hit me, certainly in that first trip.
Must have been quite a daunting thing. So tell me, what condition was the school in when you first made contact with Simantoi, and what was it like when on your first trip? How far had it progressed?
So when I first got in contact with her, there was one iron sheet room. One. That was it. Her father had given her some land. She'd been educated. Her community, her parents had managed to find the money to send her through the education system. And she'd come home from college and was a businesswoman now. I'm a businesswoman. And she decided she was opening a bar. And she had invested some of her own money. She put up 4 iron sheet walls, and this was going to be a bar. And she'd been running this bar for a couple of months, and one day, it was during a drought, and animals were dying, and she looked at the kids and said, what is the future? If these animals die during this drought, what is the future? Because primarily people are livestock owners. And she decided that her calling was not to run a bar, but her calling was to run a school. And she decided that room was going to be Memusi. And she found a friend called Anne Wow, and she paid her a very small amount of money to be a teacher. And she had 6 kids at the school. She managed to convince a handful of parents to send their kids to school, just a handful. In that type of society, for a woman to be telling men anything, you need to send your kids to school, was a completely foreign thought, and all credit to the bravery that she's shown. And I think, there's a future podcast, I think, talking about Simantoi. But she managed to do that. She managed to convince. And there was that one iron sheet classroom. And, the iron sheet classroom is still there. And that is incredibly important for me still to remember where we started. And that's where things grew from. Now, nobody is learning in 9-sheet classrooms anymore. We learn in stone classrooms and permanent quality space for kids to learn in. But so the first trip that I went, I think we built 3 classrooms. Now, a permanent classroom costs £10,000. An iron sheet classroom costs, I think it was about £1,000, could have been about 1,500. So clearly, as a charity, as somebody who'd never fundraised before, when we went and did the cycle at the Land's End to John O'Groats, we raised 15,000, and that gave us the ability to start building classrooms and start looking at how you run a school, what is needed inside the classroom, paying the teachers' salaries, because she couldn't afford to live on what she was being paid. So giving the teacher what she deserves to be paid. So, I arrived and I think we had 3, maybe 4 classrooms. And for those that have been to Memusi, you will obviously recognise the conference centre. That was there as a cool, very small stone structure where people would meet. But that's it. That's all that there was. No fencing, no security, no anything. Just a couple of rooms. That's it.
So in terms of the children, then obviously it started very small with just a few people that Semantoy knew.
Yeah.
How did the word get around that this was something worth attending?
There's a number of reasons, Steve, why kids come to school, and there still is. There absolutely is. Some parents will be driven by hope, by the future, by this is an escape from poverty, and some parents will absolutely get that. Some parents will be driven because you feed a child, because there is food for that child, because there is a reality. You're talking about people living in abject poverty, and for parents to have to look at their children and decide which one of them is going to eat and which one's not going to eat, that's what's facing people. So we made sure that Memusi was the best that we could do, and that would be an attraction to parents. We would have children who were transferring. Not that I agree with children transferring, and we'll probably come on and talk about that later. But we had children transferring because we were the best. We had children who were coming for free food, and then in addition to that, you will, if you search for free primary education Kenya on the internet, you will potentially be led to believe that education is free. It's not free. It's free in that there's a room. It's free in that that maybe the teacher's paid for, maybe, not guaranteed, but you need a uniform, you need stationery, you might need to pay for a desk, you might need to pay for the textbooks, you might need to contribute to the salary if the salary is not being paid for. So there are school fees for primary school children, even government schools, or particularly government schools, there are fees. We run, and always have them from day one, a free primary school. So, there are a number of reasons why children came to Memusi and why they still come to Memusi. But, once they're there, we're offering them the best that we possibly can do.
And how did that fit with the Maasai people who are basically itinerant farmers? They go where there's grazing for their goats. Doesn't having an established school in one place kind of conflict with that lifestyle?
Yeah, it does, and I understand the question, but I think a real mark of success of what we've achieved. I talked about Semantoy on day one saying, send your kids to school. There is. Never underestimate the amount of work and the amount of time that goes into relationship building. That people look at me and trust me. That people look at the teachers and trust them. That people, when I say something, that people go, he's true to that. That is going to happen. Where we are now is, and this is again, this has taken time. Again, for people who go for the first time or have been very recently, you will see a completely different picture than was there 14, 15 years ago, because there has been so much effort put into talking to parents about education, how vital it is. We're now at a point where parents, if the parents needed to move with the livestock, would leave the child with a grandparent, would leave the child with an aunt or an uncle, so that the child stays in school, because the parents now get it. The parents now get why education is good for them and good for their kids and their route out of poverty.
Brilliant. And the Maasai people are obviously very proud and culturally quite have distinct traditions
Yeah.
and heritage. And were you worried at all that we might end up accidentally diluting that by setting up a school that was funded and driven from the UK?
No, no. Well, I say no, and I mean, I've just said no twice. It's been front of my mind, always been front of my mind. I always said, and people will likely have heard me say this who've spent time with me in Kenya, I want to help to the point that it's unhelpful. Okay, now let me explain that a little bit. So if you said to me, Steve, I've got a lot of TVs and Xboxes, okay, I want to give them to every single child at Memusi. Can we start talking about that? Is that helpful to a child? No, it's not. The children's, you know, the children's life, the way that people live their life is absolutely great as it is. You know, so, you know, you question the decisions that you make that actually will negatively impact their life. Education is the right thing in life, you know, and it will change things, but it'll change things in the majority for the better. FGM, you know, early child marriage, that's part of culture. I will stand up against that because it's the wrong thing to do. It's not right to assume that all parts of culture are the right ones, because there are things that need to change. But equally, I'm in the place where I really consider every single decision that I make, every single investment that I make, to make sure it's having the maximum impact on that community and not a negative impact as well. I remember being with a group, and I was in a car, and this volunteer got in the car and drove back to Magadi with me, and we were driving along, she said, my niece goes to a school where they've got a very similar uniform. They've got, you know, the same red socks and etc. And she said, I'm going to go home, if it's okay, and I'm going to ask them for their old stuff, and then we can bring them across and it'll be uniforms. You know, it'll benefit you as a charity. Now, ordinarily, on the face of it, you could look at that and go, yeah, that'd be great. However, I pay somebody to make those uniforms, which cost me £5, you know, and that money going into the economy, that local economy, this isn't me going to Nairobi and getting a load of things. This is me investing locally, will benefit that community, will benefit children. It's the right thing to do. Now, if a uniform was costing £100, of course, getting old uniforms from the UK is the right thing to do. But it's just making sure we're doing things in the right way with the right people, supporting local, to make sure that the wider Memusi program is benefiting everyone. So again, you know, I never want to be a charity whereby I lose that control, whereby decisions are being made and we're bypassing those things, because they're integral. It's a vital part of every decision I make, putting people first.
It's back to the relationship building and building that trust, isn't it, which you need to keep the community with you. Yeah. It's a very powerful message. Well, whenever we have an interaction with the school, either from here or especially when we've been there, I'm so impressed with the teaching staff we've got. Yeah, how were you able to attract such talented and loyal teachers to the project?
do you know what? I would love to give you a scientific answer on it. I think there's probably lots of different answers, and I'm probably going to fudge my answer here. I think first and foremost, I seek out values, which are not just part of who I am, but who part of Charles Katemba, who's chair, and the whole team, leadership team at Memusi. The same applies with all of our schools. Education needs to come first. First and foremost, education needs to come first. It needs to be a passion. It needs to be something that is inbuilt in putting children first. Because if you don't have that, if it's just a job, they may be a great teacher, but they're not going to live what they need to live. The children at Memusi are very unique. They live very difficult lives, and they need the right support. They need people who understand them. They need people who are going to go that extra mile, and that makes them the teachers that they are. I think what we've done is create a real core base of people who have those values. I think if you were to start with Teacher Anne, which I've mentioned before, if you start with her as somebody who taught there and has been teaching there for 15, 16 years now, and was getting paid £20 a month, right? That is somebody who put the job before the salary, who put the job before anything. I think some teachers potentially take it too far. And I've asked them to question some of their decisions at times where their family perhaps have negatively impacted. I'm always humbled that they always make Memusi as the choice, and the amount of their reach for the amount of children who they can reach. I think having that core people who understand Memusi, who understand what we're about, and that it's not a job. It's a way of life. It has enabled us to flourish. So yeah, not scientific in any way, Steve, but I think we've managed to get people who have the same philosophy in life.
I think that shines through, Matt. And certainly when we first had our first trip there, I had no appreciation that quite a lot of the teachers live miles and miles away from their homes and their families. Some of them, it's 2 days' journey to get back to their homes. So the personal commitment they're making to the school is quite remarkable.
Immense. Absolutely.
Okay, no conversation about Memusi would be complete without mentioning Peter. So how did you manage to persuade him to become our man on the ground, our Mr. Fix-It in Kenya?
I've left Peter out of the story so far, but knowing that this question would come at some point, Peter Rapasa is probably my best friend. I met Peter. He was the first person who welcomed me into Kenya. He was my driver on that first trip that I talked about. Peter, I was with him for 2 days before we went to Tanzania. He took us on a safari. And there's a couple of things that happened. We went to a park, and as part of that trip, it was an all-inclusive trip. I'd never been on all-inclusive before, but Sally and I didn't think we needed to spend any money on an all-inclusive trip. So we didn't bring any money. Well, we didn't really. I think it was about £100 that we took. And we stopped in the middle of this national park and pulled up outside of a village within the national park. And Peter turned around and he said, so there's a Maasai village now, and you're going to go in and see the Maasai people, a Maasai family. And it will cost, I think it was about £30 each, £40 maybe each. We were to pay the leader of the village. And Sally and I are chatting away to each other and going, shall we not go? And we said, so everyone got off the bus, and there was 5 of us on the trip. The other 3 people got off ready to go. And I said, Peter, we're not going to go. We'll just stay on the bus and wait for them. And he went, no, you're going. And we said, no, we're not. We're going to stay. And he said, no, you're going. You need to meet the Maasai people. So we didn't feel like we had a choice, but we were driven to go and meet the Maasai people and see inside the houses and see the way that they lived and begin to understand. Now, I don't know whether Peter knew something. I don't know. I don't know whether he did this with everyone. I'm not entirely sure that he did. It's a question I need to ask him, actually. He left us at the border of Tanzania, told us where to go, and he got hold of me and he said, promise me you'll come back and help. And I said, okay. And nothing really significant had happened. The only thing that had happened in those 2 days, and this was part of, I mentioned before, several things happened on that trip that bothered me. This was one of the things that I remember. We were taken to the hotel after the first day of safari. We checked in, told to go to the rooms, told what time we'll meet at dinner. We went to the dining room and sat down, and the 3 other people who I would regard as adults, and Sally and I are there, mid-20s, and we were sitting there, and Peter, I remember come walking in, and he came to the table and he said, is everything okay? Your room's okay, etc. Yeah, everything's great. And then he went and sat on another table. And I'm looking across at Peter, and he's got his dinner, and I'm looking around at the table, and I'm thinking, why is Peter sitting over there? And why are these adults not saying what's going on here? And nobody did. And I sat there for about 5 minutes, and I just stood up and walked across, and I said, Peter, are you coming to join us? And he said, am I allowed? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, have you asked the other guests? And I went, I don't care. I'm not asking them. You come in and sitting with us. You're part of the group. So maybe, I don't know, maybe he'd seen something in me, but I didn't like that. I didn't like that Peter, and I still think this is the case today. I think Peter thinks there's a place in society for him. I think he sees that he's African. I think he sees that he's poor. And I think he sees there's a place in society for him, which makes me feel incredibly sad. Now, I started the whole Memusi journey, and I think I'd been doing it about 2 years, and it was the time when I was going to be coming to Kenya, and I tried to track him down. I contacted Somac, who were the travel agency that we traveled through, and it went through lots of different channels, and then it finally, I said, I don't know the man's name. I know he was called Peter, though. I don't have a picture of him, but I'm hoping you've only got one Peter. And I'm hoping you've got my details to be able to connect the two.
Yeah.
And I want to tell him that he asked me to come back and help, and I wanted to tell him that I've come back to help. I needed to tell him that. Now, Peter, I got an email back from him. I could probably track this email down somewhere to see actually what he did say. But we spoke, and Peter had lost his job at Somac. He wasn't working as a tour operator, in the travel industry anymore, because there'd been political violence in Kenya. I think the year or 2 years after we went, and therefore tourists had stopped going because they were scared. He lost his job. It hit the travel industry really hard. And in that time, he'd had a baby. In fact, I think his wife was pregnant at the time. He'd had another baby, so he had 5 children. And his wife had died. She got breast cancer and she died. And Peter had no money, and he's looking after 5 kids. And he ended up, he told me later, and again, it's a really interesting story when you hear it. The day that Peter got a phone call to say there's a guy in the UK tracking you down, Peter was on the street. And he was begging for money to get soda, to have a drink and get some sugar inside him. And he got an email, he got a phone call to say there's a guy in the UK trying to contact you. And I spoke to him, and I found out his story and offered him a job, understanding his story. And he's worked with us ever since, so it's, I think there's a tremendous amount of connections there of Peter, in fact, saying what he said to me. come back and help. I'd probably, if he hadn't said that, I wouldn't have tracked him down to tell him that I'd come back to help. You know, there's all sorts of incredible, sad disasters that had happened in his life. And, you know, at the point where he was at his lowest was the point that I've reached back out to him. So he is one of the hardest people in the world to work with. I don't know a job title. I go from head of everything amazing to head of headache department because of the amount of headaches he gives me. But I trust him implicitly. I think he's an incredible human being, and he's, again, another person who understands Memusi inside out. And in fact, he goes way beyond the line of duty and actually trying to do good as well. So,
and based on your earlier answer, Matt, a man who lives and breathes the values of the charity and his spirit and energy. I think you spend so much time with him as a volunteer going out there. He just helps to bring it all to life and keeps people's spirits high and helps to set the whole thing in a proper context. So that's a really good story. Thank you. If I can move on now, having been there just a couple of times, we've got an appreciation for how difficult it can be sometimes to get things done out there, especially from here. So can you describe some of the challenges that you've encountered, particularly in the early months and years?
I think, you know, I'm going to go back to that phrase that I used about the relationships and trust, because that is incredibly important on so many different levels. So at the very outset of this is how things sort of progressed. Okay, what do we need? We need a classroom, Matthew. Right, how much is that going to cost? It's going to cost $1,500. Great. How are we breaking that down? Okay, here's a list of 250 items that the builder's going to use. Okay, why are they using wooden doors? Why are they using metal doors? Can we not use wooden doors? Why have we got 5 windows in? Can we not have 3 windows in and save money? Okay, so if we had wooden doors, Matthew, the termites would rot the wood. And that's sort of how things went, where I now, and I still do this today, I still do it. Why are we doing that? Why do we need to do that? And there's times, you know, there's probably half of the time people go, I know, yeah, that's a good point. It's a fair point. I don't know why we're doing that. And then equally, there's other times where I get an answer back, which is like the termite one that I've just given you there. Well, we need metal doors because of the termite. So there are scenarios like that. So it's very much two-way, continuing to learn, but continuing to challenge. And again, for anyone who's listening who donates to Memusi, who's ever donated, I hope that demonstrates the level that I go to make sure that I get every ounce of value from every penny that we get. I think that over time, similarly, there's been a real growing ability to understand that we can do things different. One of the so Simon Toy died, I think it was three, might be 4 years ago now. She had a brain hemorrhage when she was 41. One of the things that I talked to her about at the very outset was, can we grow vegetables? And I'd never been to Magadi. Can we grow vegetables? And she went, it's not going to work. Why is it not going to work? It's not going to work. I know this area. We can't grow vegetables here. Okay, well, you're not willing to try. No, it won't work. Yeah, but will you give it a go? No, because it won't work. Okay, so that was a conversation that played out. I smiled to myself 2 years after she died when we grew our first vegetable. And when I arrived in Kenya, so the first time I arrived in Kenya, one of my first thoughts when I arrived at Memusi was, I understand why we can't grow things here, because there's just sand. You put a seed into the soil, of course you can't grow anything. Now, in the end, the way that I solved it was I brought soil from Nairobi. I thought, grow bags. Why don't I just buy a grow bag and I'll bring the soil. If the soil's not here, I'll bring it.
Yeah.
And that's how we start to grow things. So, you know, there is, I think, this growing understanding. And when you look at what we're doing now in innovation in classroom construction, you know, Kenyans understand one way of building a classroom. So to be able to do what we're doing right now is such progress, because here's another way of thinking. Okay, now that sounds like a good idea. So it's yet again, Steve, it's time, it's energy, it's relationships. That's how things happen. And also the time and energy into the individuals who work there, into Peter, into teacher Anne, into Joseph, who works with us at Memusi, all of those people, to get them to think in a different way. Because now what happens in a great deal of time is that they've challenged the builder before it's even come to me. You know, so we're all now thinking in the same way. So the level of thinking that I'm needing to do is far less. So it takes time. I think one of the things somebody mentioned to me recently, I think it was one of the trustees, when you look at the build that's going on at Memusi C, which is largely unsupervised, and it's a brand new innovation in construction.
Yeah.
The speed that build's going at, and we've not got somebody there who's going, where are you? Where are you, builders? Why are you sitting in the bar spending the money, your salary that we're paying you? That's not going on. We have an immense amount of people pulling in the same direction. And again, that's yet again another integral part of where we are, because, you know, we've had people approach us and go, can you build, can you come and help over here? Can you come and help over here? That would never work. You can't just go, great, we'll take Memusi there and we'll take Memusi to this country and this continent. You can't do that. The right way to do it is that we slowly, like a flower, just bloom from Magadi, because those relationships, the ability to just trust a builder and check on him every now and again, to go, just send me a photograph at the end of the day, is incredible that you have that ability, you know, because we're all one team. You know, right from the person who makes the uniforms, to the guy who's doing the building, to the teacher in the classroom, to the person who runs the accommodation, where we go and stay. You know, and yeah, people make mistakes. They always will, but so will I. And it's just about that relationship. There's nothing more valuable.
In my imagination, we've got Josiah bouncing around the building site every day saying, how far has it come today? And his enthusiasm, I'm sure, is another motivation.
I think so, but I think you've also got Matthew bouncing around in the UK, messaging Josiah and going, Josiah, how are we getting on? And he's then bouncing around again. So it was interesting, the Memusi live event we did last week, it's maybe two phrases that Peter said, and we had Matthew ringing us every day, and then you had teacher Anne who said, and we had Matthew on our neck. Again, that again is a demonstration of the relationships we've got. I speak to them almost every single day, where I'm checking in on certain things, making sure that people are doing what they need to do, but not in a micromanagement way. This is just about, you know, making sure that people are okay, that we are continuing to focus in the areas that we need to. So, yeah.
Look forward to exploring more about the Memusi project, which is really exciting, in a future podcast.
Yeah.
So, linking to the cultural bit we talked about earlier, Matt, Kenya has a challenging colonial past with sometimes uncomfortable connections with Great Britain. So I'm interested, you said when you first went out there, you were welcomed. But how would you say generally the community has responded to our work there, and how that's evolved over time?
Yeah, I fear I might end up repeating myself here, and you know, it's a really interesting question, Steve. The last trip I ever took with Simantoy, and she died a week later. She told me a story about when she was a child. Okay. Now, she died when she was early 40s, and therefore you're talking maybe 30 to 40 years ago, this story. Not hundreds of years ago, not my granddad told me this story. This is now. She said, when I was a child and I was looking after the goats, my father said, if you see a white person, run. Because if you see them, they're going to take you to America and you'll be a slave. That was an expectation. That was a belief. That was a thought that were in their minds. Now, the man who said that, I am incredibly close to. The family, I am incredibly close to. I have been right from day one. But I think that, for me, hopefully illustrates where people have been in their life, and therefore, from a trust point of view, from a relationship point of view, quite how important that would be. So if that was your perception of a white person, then where we are right now, in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parents allowing their child to go to a white person's school. And in fact, you know, we reach 16, 17,000 kids a year who we give medication to, who we give healthcare to, who we support their schools, support their teachers, all of those things. That's how far that society has progressed. And it's, yet again, the answer that I need to bring here is, it's about relationships. It's about trust. It's about, if I say I'm going to do something, that I will do it. There's times that people will ask me for things, and my answer will be, I promise that I'm going to try my best, but I can't guarantee that this is going to happen. Or I will say, leave it with me and I'll think about it. I would never be in a position where I would say yes to something unless I absolutely knew that I was going to do it. I wouldn't make an announcement on something unless I absolutely knew I was going to do it. So when somebody needs some help, somebody needs some support, when we are going to be developing a community project, my first port of call is to engage with the community, to hear their concerns, for me to give my view, for us to get to a common understanding. And there's nothing been more important than me taking that time. If there was one thing that I do at Memusi, if I ever got to the point where I go, let me step back, let somebody else who's far cleverer than me run this organization, I think the thing that I would hold on to last would be investing time with people, sitting down and having a cup of tea with them, and engaging at that level so that trust can be built. And I think that's it. I think, you know, therefore, a great deal has been forgotten from the past. I think people deal with me and who I am and the people that I bring to Kenya. And it's always seen with the best will and the best aims for progress for those people.
And maybe in a small way, in our own educational dimension, we're helping to repair some of those wounds from the past.
Hopefully so. I really hope so. I think education is so powerful on so many reasons, for so many reasons, and you know, I really hope so.
Okay. Next, I'd like to touch on the volunteer experience. I think with Memusi, it's one of the richest, culturally immersive travel experiences that I've ever had. And I've seen the emotional bonds that are created by this for many that visit. For myself and Julie, after our first visit, we were in floods of tears as we left. And I hear from the teachers that it's a common thing. How have you managed to blend a well-functioning school with the disruption that a bus full of eager volunteers brings with it?
By accident, Steve. You know, I wrote an email out to 100 people one day, and I said, I'm going to take people to Kenya. And I got up the next morning, and I think I'd got 90 replies from people saying I'd like to come. And I was on the plane. I was on the plane flying to Nairobi with a piece of paper, and a friend next to me, and I went, what are we going to do? I had no idea. The only thing that, so I had basically free reign from Simantoi. The only thing that we needed to do was go to church. That was it. And there was no negotiation there. You are going to church. Regardless of faith, you know, you need to come, because it's important. And again, you know, I have faith, and therefore it's not a hard thing for me. But again, just going back to that point on trust and relationships, just again, you know, it's an integral thing for me to do, certainly. But for people to trust volunteers as well. You know, this is what we do. This is important to us, so it should be important to you as well. The design of the trip, me sitting there on the plane with a friend designing that, nothing's changed. Nothing. What we did on that first trip, we still do now in exactly the same way. But it's incredibly important. The school flexes. You know, so the work that the children need to do in the classroom is picked up in and around. However, let me tell you another quick story. Another friend of mine, a guy called Joffrey, who for many years education officer for the government in Magadi, and he and I had a really interesting relationship. He's been one of the best guides I've ever had there. And he used to come to Memusi, and he used to give me a list of things. He used to give me a report every time he came, which made me angry. He'd give me a list of things, and he'd go, "You need to do this." I go, "How dare you? How dare you? You know, look at the other schools, the other 19 schools that are here. None of them have got these things, but you're telling me that I need these." Every single thing that he's told me to do, I've done. I'd go away and reflect and go, yeah, he's right. And I'd do. Now, he'd been a teacher in his life, and then he'd been education officer for the government. He knew what he was talking about in education. And before he retired, he came to Memusi with me, and we were sitting there, and he said, "Memusi is the best school that I've ever been to." And I said, Joffrey, how's that? How can that be? Because I know there are other schools who get better grades than us. So how can we be? And he said, because you teach kids to dream, to be creative, to think. I've never seen a school with as much colour in it, with children's ability to self-learn and self-teach and to be inquisitive about life. And that is delivered largely through the volunteers. Now, he was saying to me that that when children get secondary and it's less taught lessons but more self-learning, the children who perhaps even got better grades, you know, they will plateau, whereas our children will thrive because they've been taught to learn that way. And that's through the inquisitive way that our volunteers bring things in. Now, I've always said, regardless of what you do when you volunteer, the really important thing that you do is you give your time, all right? Because you as an individual, the fascination of you deals with the child's creativity, inquisitiveness, right? So you being there and touching you and feeling your hair and touching your tattoos and scratching at them and trying to figure out why they've not come off, wanting to know how many wives you've got and how many children you've got and what pets you've got, all of those things create that inquisitiveness. It shows children that strangers can care. It enables children to dream. On top of that, everything else, and I always say to volunteers, there's nothing more that I can ask for, that you go and you show you care. Everything else that people do on top of that then contributes to the other things that I've talked about there, the learning about life under the sea, learning a musical instrument, learning all sorts of different things, contribute to that child's thinking, new things. I remember 2 volunteers specifically teaching life under the sea. I've mentioned it, and I remember them teaching it. And because their view was, they understand wild animals, will they understand life under the sea? I remember teachers pushing kids out of the way to have a look at a picture of the blue whale in a book. Move out of the way. What is this creature? It's that big. And, that curiosity that people bring is just integral, to again, it's volunteers are part of our strategy, and it's not just a trip for people at all, and the most common thing that people say is, I fear that I've taken more away than I've given. But people, regardless, will never understand or appreciate actually what they've left behind, because you are creating the best students that you possibly can do. And, I understand people will fall in love with the kids, with the teachers, with the community, but equally it's the other way around as well. It genuinely is. It's genuinely heartfelt. I'm continually asked, how's Steve? How's Jonathan? How's Alison? How's, and I'm racking my brains thinking, who, this person? Oh, yeah, they came 5 years ago. But that person was important to that child, and that goes to show, again, the legacy of somebody who gives up a week of their life to come and volunteer.
Yeah, I've had a really good conversation with a couple of lads about the British political system and the monarchy in Britain, which I thought was fascinating, how much they knew to be able to ask really insightful questions. So it's a good illustration of what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Okay, perhaps if any potential volunteers who are listening to this, personal safety might be a question in their minds.
Yeah.
So was personal safety a concern that ever made you think it wasn't worth sending volunteer trips out there?
No, it was, for me, it was never a concern. My biggest concern was that we would get off the bus and people would be asking for things, which never has happened. Again, and we've communicated why people are coming in, why I'm bringing volunteers, what they're there for, and people understand that. You're not a tourist. You're there to help, and people get that. From a safety point of view, absolutely not. It's an incredibly safe place. We do, we have processed making sure that every T is crossed and I's dotted, in looking at the health and safety and care of volunteers. I'm gonna tell you another really quick story. There's a girl called Emma who volunteered from Halifax, and I'd sat in a cafe in Halifax with her to tell her all about it, and she was desperate to come. She loved the thought of it, and after she'd signed up, I remember sitting down with her again, and she said, "I'm worried about Ebola." And I said, "Tell me why." And she said, "Because my mum has told me about Ebola and I'm really worried about it." And I said, "Do you know where it is, the Ebola?" And she said, "It's in Africa." And I said, "Okay, where we're sitting today in Halifax, you are nearer to that Ebola strain in Africa than you would be in Kenya. Because Africa's huge." But I think, and I'm going to come back to Emma in a sec, I think the biggest cause of concern, and this is completely understandable, is parents, is partners, is the parent in the playground. That's the key one, the parent in the playground who goes, "Are you sure you should be going there?"
Yeah.
Because they've read something, they've heard something, they've seen something on TV. And again, it's just understandable concern, and I've got no problem with that whatsoever. Going back to Emma was scared, really was scared. And on the first day, I said, Emma, are you okay? And she said, I'm fine. She said, do you know what? I feel safer here than I do in Halifax. And again, I think that's it. I think, you know, that's the reality of how it feels. That's the reality of how welcome you feel, about how safe you feel. You know, but I can never articulate that enough. You need to come and experience it yourself, other than to trust me and to perhaps speak to another volunteer about their experience as well, and about how safe that they felt when they went. I remember Emma came home with no shoes. She was on the plane barefoot, and she'd travelled back from, she walked through Manchester Airport barefoot. She'd left everything behind. You know, this is a girl who was terrified of going. She was scared. She thought that all sorts of things were going to happen, and she thought she was going to get Ebola. And the reality is that none of that was true. But yeah, completely safe. And I have no reservations whatsoever in taking anyone.
It's a really good story, and fits with our own experience as well, that the fears are all imagined before you go. But once you realise you're part of a team and the community is so welcoming, it's quite an overwhelming experience of support rather than being a threat.
Yeah.
One last question, Matt, if I can call upon 5 more minutes of your time.
Yeah.
If you were advising somebody else to start up their own school in another part of Africa, what would you describe as the key ingredients of success?
What do you think I'm going to say here, Steve? I would say that the best things that you can invest your time into is listening. Never try and think that you know the answer. I'm going to tell you another story in a sec, to close off with. Never think that you know everything, regardless of how experienced you are. Never, because you'll always learn. And by absolutely give your own views, absolutely give your own set your own direction, but never be in a position where you can't learn. Because, you know, I've evolved the Memusi strategy through all sorts of conversations with lots of different people in Kenya and in the UK, through reading all sorts of books, in testing new ideas. Be ready to learn. I would also say never underestimate the importance of relationships, because if you are wanting to make a difference in my eyes, not in all senses, but in the majority of senses, takes time. It really takes time. It's based on trust. It's based on the relationships that you hold with individuals who you're working with. I remember reading a story. No, in fact, I didn't. It was somebody from who was a friend of Desmond Tutu told me this story. It was about Nelson Mandela. And when Nelson Mandela came to power, he asked 10 millionaires to build schools. And they did. They built the schools. And he said, do you know how many of those schools are still in existence today? And I said, do you know what? I don't know. And he said, no, not one of them. They're all closed, because what they did, they threw money at something, and the community were not prepared for that. And when things started going wrong, when a window broke, or the roof broke, or the electrics failed, the community said, oh, those people will come back. And they never did. And it just fell into rack and ruin. The amount of time and energy that I've spent in 16 years of really, I cannot now. It's quite funny. If I see something at Memusi, I'll stand up and pick up a spade, and it'll be taken off me immediately. And then somebody will have gone and done that work, because they are so determined that then there's going to be nothing that isn't right. Because there is that much focus. This is their school. You'll never see my name anywhere, my picture anywhere. I don't believe in it, because this isn't mine. This is their school, right? It's about me empowering people, because that school, those schools, everything that I'm doing is there to stay for the long term. And as soon as it becomes the Matthew Norton School or my picture's somewhere, right, that's me doing it for the wrong reasons. That's the school not lasting. That's me caring more about something other than I should be doing. I'm in it for the wrong reasons, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm doing that, and it's not the right way. I talked about listening, I talked about learning, and I talked about communication with people being really important. I read a fascinating book a year ago, and I've read the same chapter. I read the same chapter probably every couple of weeks, because I'm so fascinated by it. And it talks about an organization who developed a brand, an idea, a concept that would pump water by children playing. So children's playground equipment would end up generating the water. And because what they saw is that children weren't playing with games, and that women were carrying water. So we're gonna come up with this thing. That program got an immense amount of money, got celebrities behind it, got massive benefits from global operations that were happening. I'm being vague with the details, but it's really massive support.
Yeah.
That playground equipment, it turns out, to generate enough water to provide the community or the village, the homestead, with enough water, would need to be played with for 28 hours a day. 28 hours a day. So the equipment actually didn't produce enough water that the village needed. The women were having to play with the equipment themselves in order to generate the water. They were then too tired to farm the land, right? So again, what you've got there is a scenario of somebody coming in and going, I know what you need. Let me fix this. Not really testing it out, not listening to people, not talking to people. Do people actually need that?
Yeah.
Right? The biggest contributing factor that you can have on a child's education is to deworm a child. Statistically, biggest contributing factor. That costs 50 pence. 50 pence to deworm a child, because a child who has got abdominal worms can't concentrate, probably not in school, will miss school. All of those things, very little amount of money. So you put that in contrast there of this play equipment that actually takes 28 hours a day to produce enough water, or you can do something like spend 50 pence on that contribution to a child's education. But it's about listening and going, what are the problems? Well, we've got a real problem with abdominal worms, the parasites. Okay, so if we do this and it costs this amount of money, let's try that. Let's see how that plays out. Again, you know, we as an organisation have worked and piloted and tested reusable sanitary products, because I was going into endless head teachers' offices and seeing the statistics of number of boys and number of girls by year group and going, why in every single school do we almost drop to 0 girls in grade 8? Well, that's because they have their period. Okay. Well, let's try this. We reduced absence by 40%. It went from 44% to 0 in the first month that we did this. You know, so you listen, you test, you have conversations, you help people, you work on it together. So, you know, a long answer there, Steve, to your question, but you know, don't ever underestimate. Don't try and be this grand charity. If you're determined to make a difference, if you're really determined to make a difference, and that's what you're putting first and foremost, listen to people, build relationships, take your time, right? Because they're the most valuable things that you can do.
Brilliant answer. Very good. Is there anything that we haven't covered in this conversation? Any points that you'd like to make?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, as usual, Matt, I think it's a remarkable and inspirational story. So thank you so much for sharing it with me and with all the listeners. And I look forward to hearing about our future plans and development aspirations for taking the school and the whole project forwards.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Do you know what? I really appreciate the time. You know, I'm hoping that everyone listening has been inspired, found out more about our work, about the Memusi story, hopefully found out things that they don't know as well. As ever, you know, I hope again it's come across quite how important everybody is, you know, how important every donation, child sponsorship, everything that people do is to our work as well, because none of it would be possible. You know, I'm just one person supported by some incredible people. We couldn't do it if we didn't have the support from people as well. So just a massive thank you to everyone who's listening in as well.
And hopefully we've piqued some people's curiosity as well to find out a bit more and make contact with one of us in the team to be able to find out how they can help.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Matt.